Hey, we're back for more seconds, and Rich has a question for us, so I'll throw it to you, Rich.
So as we were talking on Sunday in Revelation chapter 3, Jesus says to the church in Laodicea, I wish that you were either cold or hot. And both of those had good purposes, right? Cold water is refreshing, hot water is for cooking and medicinal uses, but instead you're lukewarm and I'm going to spit you out of my mouth. And we spent some time talking about what it meant to be lukewarm, and it was really that feeling of, hey, we're comfortable and self-sufficient in our lives, and that's really what was going on in the church in Laodicea. So let's just bounce around a little bit. What does that look like, especially here in America? What does it look like as believers, followers of Jesus, to be too comfortable or too self-efficient or sufficient, and how do we guard against that?
We'll start with you, Connor.
I guess just for me personally, I think of my own life, and it's, I know when I'm being too self-sufficient based on my attitude towards others or myself, and really how much I am praying. So if I'm going, well, I can do this totally, like I've got this, or, or that guy, I don't know how he's doing, and if my attitude is puffing myself up and kind of looking down on other people, then I know I'm being way too self-sufficient, and I have a very high, wrong view of who I am and what I can do. And when I am not praying and really asking God to work, I know, oh my gosh, I am doing it all in my own power and my own strength, and it always ends up biting me in the butt. So I guess to answer the second half of the question is how do we guard against it, is I really think it's praying and cutting that time out and really asking God to keep us from being self-sufficient, asking that He would take us out of our comfort zone and stretch us like Andrew was talking about on Sunday, and just constantly praying, constantly meditating and thinking about how holy and righteous and all-powerful God is, like in the end of Job, where God's like, who do you think you are? Like, I did this and this and this. And I think those are things I personally do. Don't always succeed in doing them, but I try to do to make sure I am not being self-sufficient.
What would you say, Rich?
I see, well, let me back up. 1996, I took my first mission trip to Jamaica, and not to the nice parts of Jamaica.
Mm-hmm.
And I came back after being there for 2 weeks with a completely different view of American Christianity, as I watched brothers and sisters who were so poor they couldn't afford shoes, who just loved to play soccer, but couldn't ever even imagine buying a soccer ball, and they just kicked around a roll of tape. And I came back, and what was funny is that and some people who will remember me from then will know how I came back. I came back so self-righteous about how wrong we were about everything that we did here in our country. And quite frankly, I think I was reacting to the comfort and self-sufficiency we have in this country by actually becoming very self-sufficient and saying, we're all wrong. We have so much, and it oftentimes makes us so stinking comfortable that we just don't like to move. So how do we guard against it? I think going on fasts at times, and I'm not talking food necessarily, although that's not a bad thing, but going on fasts from our phones and our technology and some of the stuff that we just lean on for comfort is not a bad thing. I guard against it. It's funny, as we're sitting here in my office, there's a prayer up on the wall that was prayed by Martin Luther. And one of the things he says is, he goes, as a pastor and teacher of the church, God, I'm asking you to help me, because if I am left to myself, I will bring it all to ruin. And those are things that I need to pray on a regular basis, because I can get so comfortable. And when I get comfortable, I become very self-sufficient. I don't need God. I don't need other stuff, because I've got it all. I can provide. And we need to remember. We need to remember Which is what God constantly said to the nation of Israel. You need to remember, you didn't get away from Egypt on your own. I was the one who led you out. You didn't feed yourself in the wilderness on your own. I was the one who provided the food.
Well, as you say that, then as I think about self-sufficiency and this whole thing, self-sufficiency does not require any faith. Zero amounts of faith with self-sufficiency. So I find that when I start to wrestle with issues of self-sufficiency, it's what I'm going to do, how I'm going to do it. For me, as I look at it, I really look at the internal attitude that's taking place inside of me. Probably impatience, at times anger, irritation, aggravation. That stuff starts to kick in because things aren't going the way that I had planned, and I'm putting things together and da-da-da-da like that. I think another part of this whole thing of this self-sufficiency is when you become really self-sufficient, you've got the answers, you got it figured out, and there's not a lot of listening and a lot of hearing, a lot of interacting, a lot of questioning. Faith, I find, requires a lot of questions. It requires me to take time to think. It takes time to pray. It's taking time to really get a sense of and to seek to getting in touch with where I think God might be leading. And now for me in that journey, I find that it's so much more a matter of feel than a matter of know. If I make sense as I say that, at least for me in my journey, as I'm learning, really starting to sense where I believe God might be leading and directing, but then that's also affirmed usually and confirmed through others that are also seeking to live in sync with the Spirit. So I find often self-sufficiency often has few questions that haven't already been answered. There's usually an absoluteness of opinion or direction. I agree with you, limited prayer with self-sufficiency, so I'm not praying a whole lot about it, talking to God about it, because I've already gotten it figured out. And it really deals with so much internal stuff. And the truth of the matter is, internally, I know when I'm being self-sufficient, because I know the internal workings of my attitudes and that kind of stuff. And I know when I'm not really leaning, but rather I'm arguing for a point or a direction or a perspective that I'm convinced we need to go in. And there's seldom any real questions being asked.
I liked one of the things you said there. It just triggered something in me. You know, how upset do we get when our plans don't go according to the schedule or plan? That's a telltale sign of self-sufficiency, right? Yep. If it's not going the way I want it to, the schedule isn't the way I planned it, and that's really hard for somebody who's a schedule-oriented person and likes to have everything in a row. But it can go so far as, hey, as we're walking, would I be wrecked if I lost this? Would life be over? Would I be completely wrecked if I lost this? Well, maybe that's an area that's a little too comfortable for us, or we're placing a little too much sufficiency on as opposed to putting it in Christ.
And as you say that, self-sufficiency so often lines everything up and has everything mapped out. And so as we're starting the journey, we already know how everything's going to be answered.
Yeah.
So often God is not calling us to start the journey with all the answers in place and all the solutions in place and all the resources automatically all in place. I find oftentimes Jesus is calling me to start the journey without even clarity on the destination, and not even sometimes with clarity as to where I'm supposed to get to today. And yet, self-sufficiency, I'm going to have a whole lot more of that stuff mapped out than just trusting and leaning as we go.
I hope that helps you wrestle through and think through some of that. We'll see you on Friday.
See you guys.